almost by definition, your current habits are perfectly designed to deliver your current results. The way one friend put it to me recently is like, if you have great results today, you were killing it 6 months ago. And I think that's kind of the way to think about it. It's like whatever system you've been running recently, whatever your habits have been for the last 6 months or year or whatever, those are the things that have delivered you to this point right now. And so what needs to change is not the outcomes that we also badly think need to change. What needs to change is the system that precedes them, the habits.
You're listening to the eCommerce Influence Podcast with Austin Bronner and Andrew Foxwell. If you want honest, transparent, and tangible results that deliver lasting value and revenue, this is your podcast.
As an e-commerce brand, you know that managing your cash flow is the key to understanding and growing your business. That's exactly where Pilot can help. They're a bookkeeping company built for e-commerce brands. Pilot pairs you with a dedicated finance expert who knows your business inside and out, sends you monthly reports that include your inventory statement, merchant fees, COGS, and more. Plus, Pilot syncs with Shopify, PayPal, Magento, and more, which means that your books are always accurate. No more clicking around in QuickBooks. You always know where your money is. If you want to get an accurate picture of your cash flow and get your books right and grow confidently, Pilot's offering 20% off 6 months of bookkeeping right now by going to ecommerceinfluence.com/pilot, and you can sign up there.
If you're nervous about your online business right now, consider this. There's no better time to make the most of your website traffic. Everyone is at home and they're shopping online. Just Uno is the #1 conversion rate optimization tool to keep your e-commerce site thriving. From growing your email list to collecting numbers for SMS messaging or showing smart product recommendations, Just Uno helps you convert visitors into purchasers. It's the best time to have an e-commerce site, so make the most of it with Just Uno. Head over to ecommerceinfluence.com/justuno for a no credit card required 14-day trial and a one-click install on Shopify. Check it out. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the e-commerce Influence Podcast. My name is Austin Bronner.
And I'm Andrew Foxwell. Man, I am just super excited, honestly, as we always say, to have James Clear on the podcast today. Love this guy.
Yeah, man, it's somebody who we wanted have on the podcast for quite some time, and I will say that we just wrapped up this interview and we're recording the introduction here. It did not disappoint. I am really, really excited about this episode and some of the things we got to cover with James. Mm-hmm. For those of you who don't know who James Clear is, he wrote the book Atomic Habits and also runs the blog, James Clear Blog, which is more than a blog. It's really just a collection of incredible articles about living and habits. And yeah, man, it was a really incredible interview.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's 2 books that have really changed my life in the last 5 years. Essentialism and Atomic Habits. So we go into in this episode his thoughts on what you can do for your business to grow it, how you can market better, how you can start to rethink your habits, how you can start to get rid of bad habits, what the process of getting better looks like, building better systems. We really cover a lot of stuff here in the next 40 minutes. And yeah, I'm really proud of it. I think that, he is someone that can speak to anyone really, no matter what kind of industry you're in. So if you put on, the episodes of the e-commerce influence in the car, and sometimes your family is like, hey, we're sick of listening to e-commerce influence about e-commerce only. This is a perfect one to share with them because it's not necessarily only e-commerce.
You tell your family, like, listen, you need to know more about Facebook ads. If you're going to, that's how you pay your rent.
Yeah, exactly. You need to know about it.
But no, anyway, it just also a very well-spoken dude. So thank you for James to join the show, and let's bring him in here.
All right. Well, James Clear, New York Times bestselling author, former college baseball star, noted public speaker, email newsletter guru. I mean, what else can we say? Welcome to the show, man. We're so glad to have you.
You're too generous. Thank you. Yeah, good to talk to you.
It's a huge honor to have you on the show, to be honest with you, because Austin and I both read your book and we called each other immediately after reading it and talking about the things we were going to implement in our businesses right away. Let's just start really simply, by asking, why do so many of us find it difficult to develop and maintain habits that clearly improve our lives?
Yeah, interesting question. I think maybe another way to frame it is like, what is the difference between a good habit and a bad habit? And why do we so readily slide into bad behaviors or unproductive behaviors and find it so difficult, as you mentioned, to like build good ones? And I like to distinguish between the two by thinking about behaviors producing multiple outcomes across time. So broadly speaking, there's like an immediate outcome or a near-term outcome, and then there's like an ultimate outcome. And what you find is for a lot of bad habits, the immediate outcome is actually pretty favorable. Like the immediate outcome of eating a donut is great. It's sweet, sugary, tasty, it's enjoyable. It's only the ultimate outcome, if you keep eating donuts for a year or 2 years or whatever, that's unfavorable. Take like smoking, for example. The immediate outcome might be that you get to socialize with a coworker, or that you take a break from work, or you curb your nicotine craving, or reduce stress or something. So the immediate outcome might be favorable. It's only the ultimate long-term outcome that's unfavorable. With good habits, though, it's often the reverse. Like what is the immediate outcome of going to the gym for a week? Not a whole lot. Like your body looks the same. The scale hasn't really changed. If anything, you're maybe sore. So it's only the ultimate outcome of going for a year or 2 years that's beneficial. So the way that I like to summarize that is the cost of your good habits is in the present. The cost of your bad habits is in the future. And when you're building bad habits, it's almost like you're accruing a debt that needs to be repaid at some point. And when you're building good habits, it's almost like you're building up a credit that you get to redeem in the future. And so the process of building good ones and breaking bad ones, it often comes down to that misalignment and trying to find ways to make habits more enjoyable or easier to do or more frictionless in the moment so that you have a reason to stick with it, and trying to find ways to kind of pull those long-term consequences or costs of your bad habits into the present so you have a reason to avoid it. So I feel like that's probably one of the central reasons why people struggle to build good routines and make routines last.
During this, so since you launched Atomic Habits, obviously it took off, and before that, your blog had been thriving, but Atomic Habits has been a very, very successful book, and I've watched you kind of over the last year travel around, hit different interview circuits, and travel kind of all over the world. Like there's interviews with you on YouTube in London and Europe, in New York. As you've been going around and you've been interviewing with all these people and talking about it, what are the questions that just you are sick of answering after a year of talking about habits?
Yeah, it's funny. It's been a really wild year. I think I went to 14 countries in 6 months or something. It's just like almost every continent. It's great. I mean, it's been a wonderful thing. I feel very fortunate. But also, of course, it's like tiring in its own way, or just, it's been a crazy experience. I hope that I don't have another travel year like that, although it was very fun to do one time. To be perfectly honest, I don't really have any questions that I really hate. The thing that's nice about habits is that it's sort of one level up from everything everybody's implementing. So like, for example, if I'm on a health and fitness podcast, like I just did a podcast with some powerlifters a couple weeks ago, and that's a whole different area for me to talk about how to apply the concepts. And then I come and I talk to you guys about eCommerce or marketing or something. And like, that gives me a business lens to look at it. And then I did an interview with Sam Harris about meditation habits. And so my point is the principles are the same, but the applications are kind of fun and unique and different each time. And so it really helps me a lot, because I've done over 200 interviews now about the book. It helps keep it fresh for me. So I also I took a little break. I'm doing some interviews now, but I hadn't done any for the last 3 months. So I don't feel as fatigued by it. Maybe if you had hit me like 6 months after the book had come out and that was all that I had been doing for 6 months, then I might have a more pointed answer. But right now I'm feeling pretty good.
I mean, I think that that's good. I'm glad to hear that, because we tried to really come up with questions like, what would James really not want to answer? So that's really what our list is here. Obviously I'm joking. Getting back to the formation side of it, bad habits accrue a debt, good habits accrue a credit, kind of talking about translating that into a little bit what you discuss around destination. of success, and people focusing on that destination, more money, more sales, big house, and that's the kind of thing that I think we hear about a lot in e-commerce, scaling, I want to get bigger, but they don't focus on the journey, right? The small habits. And that's really what the core thesis of the book is. Why do you think people have such a hard time focusing on just these, the stuff they don't see stacking over time? And how can you, as an entrepreneur, start to tick up to see progress from those small wins that you're making?
Yeah. Well, so let me answer that in a sort of a roundabout way, or just step back for a second. So broadly speaking, there are kind of like three big ideas that the book centers around. So the first big idea is that habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. And so if you can get 1% better each day, if you can find some small way to make an improvement, to build a better habit, to accumulate some upgrade, then that'll compound over time. It'll turn into something really significant. And so all those outcomes that you're mentioning, big house, nice car, successful business, et cetera, those are really the results or the byproducts of the habits that preceded them. And so most of your outcomes in life are like a lagging measure of your habits. Like your bank account is a lagging measure of your financial habits. Your physical fitness is a lagging measure of your eating and training habits. Your knowledge is a lagging measure of your reading and learning habits. Even like the clutter on your desk or in your garage is a lagging measure of your cleaning habits. And so for whatever reason, we get very outcome focused. I think part of it is because the news cycle and social media are very outcome focused. And that's honestly it's a maybe an unfortunate byproduct of it, but I don't know that it is necessarily vindictive or anybody's trying to do something evil with it. It's just that things seem to only be newsworthy or noteworthy once you get to a result. You're never going to see a news story that says man eats chicken and salad for lunch. It's only a news story when man loses 100 pounds. Right? You need to get to the result before people talk about it. You don't see people covering writer is halfway done with their script for the screenplay. It's no, Broadway show is a hit. That's when you hear about it. So the results of success are often highly visible and easy to see, and the process of success is often invisible and hidden from view. And so that idea of getting 1% better each day, I think addresses more of that process. So that's the first big idea. The second big idea, which extends directly from that, is you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And I define that by saying your goals, that's your desired outcome. Your system is the collection of daily habits that you're following. And if there's ever a gap between your system and your goal, if there's ever a gap between your desired outcome and your daily habits will always win. Almost by definition, your current habits are perfectly designed to deliver your current results. Or the way one friend put it to me recently is if you have great results today, you were killing it 6 months ago. And I think that's kind of the way to think about it. It's whatever system you've been running recently, whatever your habits have been for the last 6 months or year or whatever, those are the things that have delivered you to this point right now. And so what needs to change is not the outcomes that we also badly think need to change. What needs to change is the system that precedes them, the habits that come before the outcomes. And again, I think getting 1% better each day and kind of accumulating those habits in this kind of compound interest form is one of the best ways to build a better system. And then those two things lead us to the third kind of big idea, which is every action that you take is a vote for the type of person that you want to become. And so your habits are actually how you embody a particular identity. Every day that you write one sentence, you embody the identity of someone who is a writer. Every time you make your bed, you embody the identity of someone who's clean and organized. And this, I think, is maybe the real answer to your question, which is that people say that what they want is a bigger house or a nicer car or a more successful business. But what you really should be focused on is who is the type of person that could achieve those outcomes. We put the outcome front and center, but I think instead we need to put the identity front and center and let our habits reinforce being that kind of person. And then the results kind of come naturally along the way. So I think those three big ideas, getting 1% better each day, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems, and using your habits as evidence for a new identity, that every action you take is like a vote for being the kind of person who could achieve that outcome. That maybe is where our focus should actually be.
Yeah. I mean, the identity thing is when I read the book is the biggest piece that hit for me. And in terms of what does that actually, what does a person that leads in this industry look like? Right. And I think, that started to inform a whole bunch of other things. It was like, I was trying to think about, I think a lot of us look at your peers. This is me. I mean, I can't speak for Austin, I guess, but like look at your peers and you're like, oh, what's everybody else doing? Right. And really that's not the question. The question is really like, what's the identity of a person that's actually like different? That's a leader that grows across all of these different people or all these different organizations. And that doesn't exist. And so I started to think about that. And then my wife and I, we were on the business together, we started to write down sort of like what that person does. And then like the strategy of like what we needed to do became actually really clear. It was actually really funny because we were in California, like in Santa Barbara for part of the winter. And I was reading your book in January, which is like, great goal setting time a year ago. And I remember just like freaking out and walking downstairs and being like, you got to listen to this. This is crazy. You got to read this chapter or this part of the book. And it was just something that we hadn't thought about. And so that identity side is so big. It's like the Brene Brown, like story we tell ourselves thing, right? Of like, oh, this is who I really am. And once you start thinking in that way, I bought a little thing in Santa Fe that's like they're called a fetish, like Native American fetish. I don't know if you've ever heard of these things. They're little animals that have meaning. I'm not like super hippy dippy here, but it was a cool idea. And it's made from Native American tribe. And mine is an eagle, of thinking about like eagles are looking above everything else. It's sort of the 40,000 foot view. And that's the only thing I have on my desk. That and my monitor sits on a copy of your book, to be totally honest with you. And so
That's
like
awesome.
So those are the things that that identity side, it was what really shifted, because then it wasn't like a positive or negative thinking. It was just like, what does that person actually do? And what do they look like?
Yeah, that's great. Like a lot of the time you mentioned looking at your peers, or we imitate or try to reverse engineer the success of other people. Usually when people do that, it's kind of like, what do I want my best day to look like? I want to win the Super Bowl, or I want to exit a business for, some multiple, or whatever it is. Like you have some outcome sort of in mind. And I think actually the question should not be, what do I want my best day to be, but what do I want my normal day to be? And it's sort of like, what is the lifestyle that I need to be following in order to get there? And that's kind of what you're talking about backing into. It's like, okay, if this is the identity we're trying to build, either as an individual or as a company or as a team, then what do the normal days need to look like for us to go in that direction? What do the habits need to be in order to reinforce that desired identity? And it just gives you a different way of looking at things.
Yeah, the normal day thing is what you tweeted about whenever it was. I don't know, in the last year. You're what success actually means. Of success is the freedom to. It's not financial success necessarily. It's the freedom to do what you want to do. It's the freedom to create your own schedule, not have to get on a call with losers, like us. I'm just kidding. But like, what do I want that normally to? What do I want that normally to be? And that is exactly what was a product of that identity thing, which is that I wanted part of the identity in Austin. I'll shut up after this. But I wanted the identity to be someone that people looked to us because they knew that we were not working all the time sitting in front of a computer, and we were actually taking time out on a mountain bike, out walking with the dog, whatever. Thinking outside of it, because I think so many people are stuck in that computer work, and I wanted to have the identity be, hey, we're strategically thinking bigger than this. And that's a lot of people now that are busy, and colleagues call us because they know that we're going to have the headspace to talk about it, which is it's just like a super interesting byproduct of it. But Austin, take it away, man. Sorry about my little questions.
No, it's interesting. I actually haven't heard that discussion from you either, so it's interesting for me. But one thing I want to dive into, I mean, we're recording this in a really interesting time. And this interview is going to come out during this interesting time when we've got a shelter in place order kind of around the US, around the world. People are in quarantine, and it's proven to be a big time of crisis for a lot of people and also for businesses. With this, there's a lot of change that is coming around. How are you thinking about habits, habit formation, and just what are your thoughts around how people and business owners can use this time as a positive, or to frame it in a way that they can think of as a positive?
Yeah, it's a good question. So anytime the environment changes in a big way, behavior changes in a big way. And a lot of people are having a change in their environment right now. They're working from home when they normally aren't. They're sheltering in place when they normally can go out and about. And so naturally, you're going to see a shift in behavior because of that. And one way to think about your habits is to think about them as behaviors that are tied to a particular context. Like your habit of watching Netflix is tied to the couch at 7 p.m. or your habit of scrolling social media is tied to the coffee shop across the street from the office at 10 a.m. or whatever. And so one question that we can be asking is, what can I do with this new context now? Normally I'm not in my living room at 10 a.m., but now I am because I'm sheltering in place. So what can I do about that? What habits are accessible to me there that maybe normally aren't? So that's like some piece of it. But I do like the part of the question where you're like, how can we frame this in maybe a more optimistic way? And it is true that in many areas of life, stimulus or a stressor leads to growth. So obviously this is true in the gym. The whole point of lifting weights is that you put some stress on your body so that then you can adapt and grow and become stronger in response. But I think it's also true not just for the physical body, but for our mindset and mentality, for our emotions, for our ability to handle responsibility and take ownership of things. You see this when people get promotions sometimes. They get promoted into a new role. There's additional responsibility, there's additional stressors, and the good ones are able to adapt to it and increase their ability to take ownership of things and guide the team and so on. And so it's actually the stressor that leads to the growth. And that is potentially one favorable way to frame this experience is, and you don't have to discount the terrible things about it, right? There, of course, we're sick and dying. There are awful things that are, like all of that is still true. But as much as possible, we can try to frame this situation in a way that favors us. And I think that starts with believing that story that I'm telling is true, that we can respond to stressors in a favorable way, that they can actually upgrade your mindset and lead to growth. And as soon as you frame this situation not as something that was forced upon you and is growth inhibiting, but actually as something that you can accept and is growth inducing, then suddenly you start to look at the whole situation in a new light. And so the question is not like, what am I being prevented from doing? It's what am I building now? And whether that's building a better mindset or a better business or whatever, I think all of that is possible, but it does require a reframing of the situation.
Is there anything that you've done personally since this started? Things you've changed, ways you've been thinking that are maybe different in the past, or anything that you've taken away already since this has begun?
Yeah, it's only been, a couple of weeks, but one thing, so again, not driving to restaurants or I've got like extra time here, as many of us do. And so I want to make sure that I'm using that time in an efficient way. So as one example, I'm hoping to read a little bit more with some of those extra moments throughout the day. And so I have made some actual changes. This is in Atomic Habits. I refer to this as like environment design. But the idea is you're trying to prime the environment that you're living and working in so that the good habits are more obvious, available, and easy to do. And the bad habits have kind of more steps between you and them. So for reading, right now on my desk, I've got a stack of 5 or 6 books that's next to me. So I can just pull one of those when I have a free moment. I have some next to on the end table by my bed and in the living room. So I kind of have books like sprinkled throughout the house. Then on my phone, I moved Audible to the home screen so that it's in the home bar there. It's the first thing that I see when I open the phone up, again, to try to like prompt me to remind me to read more and not get distracted. And then when I'm on my computer, usually I'm spending time in the browser. And I typically have like 10 to 20 tabs open at any given time. And 2 or 3 of those are usually related to work, like Asana or Gmail or whatever. But the other 10 or so are often either articles that I want to read or that I'm in the middle of reading. And so between those 3 things, sprinkling books around the physical environment, moving Audible to the home screen, so it's the first thing I see on the phone, and then making sure that I have a lot of tabs on the desktop so that I can, whenever I get distracted in a given moment, it's like, what do I go to next? Oh, I can just click on one of these and read it. That creates an environment where it's easier for me to build a reading habit. And that's sort of the idea behind environment design for whatever habit you're trying to apply it to. No single choice like that is going to radically transform your life. But if you make a dozen or 20 or 50 little choices like that, then suddenly it becomes easier to do the good habit because it's the path of least resistance. So that's one little change that I've made so far.
Love it. Yeah, no, it's one simple change I made as well was my TV is in the garage with no chairs. So if you want to watch TV, you got to go sit on the concrete in the garage.
That's great. That's great. That's a good example of, in the book, I call it, if you want to build a good habit, it's make it easy. But if you want to build a bad habit or break a bad habit, it's make it difficult. That's an awesome way to add friction, right? Like it's not very enjoyable. Who wants to go out there? But first of all, who wants to walk out to the garage when usually it's in the living room? And then who wants to sit on the ground? That's good.
Well, it's also, Austin, habit stacking because you have it in the garage and it's where you only watch TV when you work out.
It's where my gym is. So
Yeah.
it's doubled up right there. I'm doubled up.
That's like
Yeah,
James
that's a
talking
good.
about
Now it's
doing
like,
the stationary bike and
you're.
Netflix or whatever. You use it as an
Yes,
example,
right.
James. Yeah.
That was one of my favorite examples I came across when I was researching the book. This guy wanted to work out more, but he was always watching Netflix. And so he was an engineering student and he programmed his cycling, his stationary bike, so that Netflix would pause if he wasn't spinning the wheels. And he basically like binge watched himself to a better body.
One thing I'm always interested in when we have guests on the show that are sort of outside of the e-commerce industry, especially, leaders like yourself, James, is what is more tactical. And maybe you have been brought in on certain consulting agreements or something, but if let's say you get brought in on a e-commerce business and they're doing pretty well. They want to sell more. They want to continue to grow online. You're sitting in that meeting. They hire you to help them begin thinking about this in the context of habits. What do you start talking about? I mean, obviously some of it, clearly the first thing is like read the book, right? But like, what are the numbers you're interested in? What are the things that you're curious about? Is it about the VPs and the executives, what they're doing on a daily basis? Is it about aligning goals and KPIs? Is it about singular sources of data? Like what are the things that to you sit down and you see like these are things that can make an impact in this business right away?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I do a lot of keynote speaking for businesses, but I don't do consulting because it sounds like my nightmare. It just sounds so boring to me to do that. But what I do love is thinking about all of those things that you just mentioned for my own business. And so I'm very concerned with like conversion rates, particularly to the email list, because I consider that to be the backbone of my business. So the first thing, if I'm just running this through my filter, this is not necessarily the best thing for every business to do. But if it was going through my filter, I would be focused on like one, email list growth. What does that look like? How are we getting people onto the list? What are they expecting when they get there? My business is more content driven than most e-commerce businesses would be. Like J. Crew is not like getting you to sign up to get blog posts from them. They're like giving you 20% off. Whereas I'm, much more interested in developing a relationship around the ideas. And then I know that if you love the emails that you get from me every week, then 2 years from now, I'm going to be launching a new book and a bunch of people are going to buy it who are on the list. So I guess my focus is more on traffic generation, conversion to the email list, using the email list as the backbone of the business. And then I have these other places like Instagram, Twitter, the website itself, and SEO, which I consider to be places where readers are coming into the business, but I don't consider those to be my audience. I only view my email list as the actual audience. So those are all sort of just like free lead gen, essentially. And then once people get onto the list, then I'm thinking much more about the experience that they're having. So what are they expecting? How can we provide a little bit of delight to them that maybe they're not expecting? So, free downloads, or like when people sign up, they get the first chapter of my book for free, stuff like that. And then also, what are your expectations ongoing, and how can we try to exceed that each week? I like the idea that you're only one bad email from people unsubscribing. So every email matters. And also that in the long run, all of these businesses are kind of the same in the sense that it's the only reason people stick around is because you're providing remarkable value. And so that's true whether you're talking about Elon designing the first Tesla and like it has to be this awesome groundbreaking thing, or it's true if we're talking about me writing a blog post, like it needs to be so good that people are like, I got to tell somebody about this. I need to like share this with my family or my friend or whatever. And that's a very hard bar, difficult bar to hold yourself, difficult standard to hold yourself to. But in the long run, I don't know any other way to build a business than that. Like everything else is just a short-term tactic if you're not providing remarkable value. So I don't know that those are good answers or what you were looking for, since I don't do much consulting, but that's kind of my lens for how I think about it.
I think it is. It talks about you really mentioned like the singular focus, of like the email list is like the main one. And Austin, that's something you have a ton of expertise in.
When I was doing my research, I was going through and I've read a lot of your end of year reviews. And, one of the things you mentioned this year was that you'd felt like your business was growing up a little bit. And when I read that, I was thinking, I guess, what does that mean to you? And what are some of the things that you've learned from transitioning from initially a person who's a writer or a blogger or whatever you were calling yourself to a business owner over the last how many years? Is that 8 years as you've been building the
Yeah.
website?
Yeah. I've been an entrepreneur for 10 years, and I've been working on jamesclear.com and Atomic Habits and all the stuff related to what I do now for 8 years. Let me answer with a quick little story, which is when I first launched the website and got going online very early on, didn't know anything, like all of us, like when you're starting out, you don't know anything. And I read this article on 50 ways to drive traffic to your website. And over the next few months, I went through and I tried all 50, and none of them worked well for me. And I remember being so frustrated and thinking like, either one, am I just an idiot and like I can't figure this stuff out? Or two, is this person lying and like they just made this stuff up and it doesn't actually work well? And thankfully there were more options than that, and I kept stuck with it and kept trying some other things. And eventually within the first year or two, I started to find a couple things that actually did work fairly well for me. And my point with that is every entrepreneur is biased to their own personal history about how they built their business and how they grew their audience and how they found success. But the truth is there is just like almost an infinite number of options for how you can build a successful business. And I think whether those options work for you or not is not only a function of the time in history or the time that you're trying it, but also your particular skill set, your skills and traits and characteristics, and your particular business, what you're selling and so on. Like I have a friend who she has a hand lettering business, and Instagram is huge for her. It's bigger than her email list. All of her workshops sell out from Instagram, not from email. Now, for me, that's kind of like a mind blow because Instagram was like the least useful thing for my business. But anyway, my point is that it's highly contextual. And so what I'm getting at here to answer your question is for the first few years of my business, really honestly, to a certain degree, we could say like the first 5 years, I was finding success, but I really felt like what I was mostly doing was experimenting. I was trying a bunch of stuff to see what was going to stick, what path and avenue like revealed itself as both aligning with the business I was trying to build and my particular skill sets and this particular time in history. And it's only over the last year or two that I felt like that strategy has become more clear to me, where I'm like, okay, now I actually know. Weirdly, I've been running this thing for 8 years, but now actually I finally know what I'm actually running, what are we actually trying to build here? Honestly, the launch of Atomic Habits was a big milestone in that for me, because for the first time, I found a product that I was really good at selling. Sales feels uncomfortable to me. I think it feels uncomfortable to a lot of people, but all the other stuff that I tried, online courses, selling on webinars, pitching stuff in person, it just, none of it felt like it was me. But writing a book and trying to make it the most comprehensive, best possible guide on a particular topic, and then selling that book and talking about it in interviews like this and so on, that feels way more like what I want to do. And it took me 7 or 8 years to get to that point, but I feel like the business is maturing because now I have a better idea of what the strategy is. And I don't know how long it takes other entrepreneurs, but that's how long it took me.
I think that's a pretty common amount of time. I feel like I've been on a similar timeline with building a business and taking a huge number of years to experiment and then to actually get to a point where it's like, I feel like there's something. You just learn so much. And Andrew, how long have you been running your business?
It'll be technically like 8 years. So, 7, 8 years. Yeah. It depends on when you define the beginning of it, but yeah, it's been a while. I agree. And everybody's the experimentation is, I think, a huge part of it. And it's vastly different what we do now than what we started out doing. And I don't know, I feel like that's like the name of the game. I want to get to one thing that you mentioned, James, which is, I think this podcast could be named the podcast where Andrew compliments James a lot. So one of the things that I think that you are a very astute observer of trends. I've been on your email list for a long time. I really like it. It delights me. What when you are marketed to, in just generally in your life, is it delight that you're looking for, or what actually motivates you from an e-commerce company perspective? Or is it just like, you're like, nah, I don't really buy stuff online. I'm just curious, honestly, of your perspective, like what your experience is there, because I feel that right now we're kind of in this stage of like companies are still learning and figuring out how to market themselves in a lot of ways. And each business is different. But Austin and I talk about this all the time. Like there's like, it's the 80-20, like, like only 20% of companies are actually really good at knowing how to market themselves. So when you see something, what motivates you to buy it, or what motivates you to look further?
Yeah, I sort of have two different answers, so I'll try to come back to the second one here. But the first thing, I'm looking around my office right now at some of the stuff I have. I've got this one backpack that I bought. It's from a company out of San Francisco called Air, AER, and it's an awesome bag. It kind of doubles as like it looks more like a briefcase, but then it has these straps that you can kind of unzip and pull out, so it can become a backpack if you want. But the answer to your question, I think, is what I love in a single word. I would call it thoughtfulness. Or it's like somebody really cared to get it right. And I love that in almost any domain. So with this particular bag, the way that it's organized, the way it's laid out, it's just as soon as you start to use it daily, like if you use it every day for like a month, you start to appreciate how carefully it was thought out. It's like whoever designed this bag obviously used it because they get what you would want from a bag. And then the one example. So to turn it into a backpack, there's a little zipper on the back side of the bag, like what would normally go like across your shoulder blades, and it goes across the top of the bag there. And so you unzip that and then you can pull the straps out. Well, occasionally when I'm walking through an airport or waiting in line for something or whatever, I don't have the bag like that. But then, I'm checking out at the cash register, or I have to grab my passport or something. And so I need both of my hands free. So real quick, I just unzip that zipper and pull one strap out and then attach it. And you can do all this in like 10 seconds and then throw it over my shoulder. Now I got my hands free. The location of the zipper is such that if you unzip it, the first strap that you can reach is the one on the right side of the bag. And most people, myself included, are right-handed. And so that would be the more convenient one to have available versus if you unzipped it from the other side and the left one came out first. And they could have designed it either way, but the fact that they designed it that way makes me think, oh, they actually thought about this. Like what should be the first strap that you pull out of the bag? And I just feel like most products, they don't even care enough to think about that. Like that's just a very small detail. It has almost nothing to do with the fabric of the bag or the quality of the zippers or where the pockets are. Like there's all these other things that people would think about, but they wouldn't get to that level of depth. As another example, I've been listening to a lot of Maggie Rogers music recently, who I think is great. And she's super talented. And she put up a post on Instagram where one of her really popular, famous songs, she was sharing the notes that she had written when they had first worked on it in the studio. And you can just see from the notes, like she's talking about very specific things, like when a chime comes in or not, and like whether a note should be 10% louder or not, or whatever, just all these little things. And you can notice that she can't help but not get it right. If it's not right, it would like bother her for it to not be that quality. And I love stuff like that. We could call it like a craftsman mindset or something. But ultimately, the only reason that the most powerful marketing engine possible is word of mouth. And I like to think that, for example, for Atomic Habits, the only reason that it's grown as big as it has and sold millions of copies is because it's so good that you have to talk about it. And I don't know, not everybody's going to feel that way about it, but it needs that level of thoughtfulness, that level of care for it to spread and become something bigger. And I think that's true for any e-commerce company. It doesn't matter what you're building. The thing needs to be so good. Like we could call it remarkable because it is worthy of remarking on, right? Because it is, it's so good that you have to talk about it. So I think that is the central thing. So that's like the first answer that came to my mind. But then you asked like, what makes me, okay, so what if I hadn't bought the bag yet? What would make me interested, right? Like what would make me click on the ad or like read the description or visit the website? And that's an interesting question because if you go to Amazon and you buy Atomic Habits, you're not actually buying the book. Because you don't have it yet. You don't physically own it. What you're buying is the image that the sales page creates in your mind. You're buying your expectation that the book will be good. And that is true of any e-commerce product. What you purchase is the prediction that your brain makes of how favorable it is, of how much value it will provide and so on. And word of mouth is so powerful because it like short circuits that and it gives you, somebody you trust says, no, listen, this bag is really good. You should buy it. And so that's enough to get you going. But I think the job of any good copywriter, anybody who does an excellent job with sales pages, the words that I use on my email forms to get people to sign up, it needs to elicit a very positive prediction in the person's mind. And I like what Eugene Schwartz, the famous copywriter, said about this, where essentially he said, like, you cannot force someone to have a desire for a product. You can only tap into desires they already have. And so I think it requires a really deep understanding of who the person is and what people are going through and what they're thinking. What do I really want to achieve? This kind of comes back to one of the simple sales page things of like benefits, not features. Like, don't tell me that the bag has 2 straps. Tell me that, I'll be able to more efficiently go through my morning commute, or I'll never drop my coffee, or like, why do I benefit from it? Not just like, what does it contain? But all of those things, those copywriting strategies, the sales page tactics, all that stuff, it really comes back to the same idea, which is you're trying to elicit a positive prediction. You're trying to get somebody to expect it to be so valuable that they have to purchase it. And there's also a third thing that comes from this, which is this very delicate balance of marketing's job is to amp up the promise in the customer's mind so much that you like have to have it. You're like salivating for it. But then the product's job is to be so good that it exceeds that expectation. They're still delighted when they get it, so that they want it so bad. But even though they want it that bad, it's even better than how bad they expected it would be, or how wonderful they expected it would be. So I don't know. There's a lot going on there, but that was just kind of like me talking through my thoughts as you brought it up.
Well, I think about somebody who's about to buy, your example is someone on Amazon about to pull the trigger on Atomic Habits. They're already going back to the story of the story that they're telling themselves. They're buying the book because the story that they're telling themselves is that they're the type of person who can improve their habits or wants to improve their habits. And you're kind of tapping into that, which is really interesting from what you're talking about like the story addict.
So the point I made about Eugene Schwartz, you can't create desires, you can only tap into the ones that already exist. So for Atomic Habits, there's a chapter later in the book on deliberate practice. And if I wanted, I could have written a book about deliberate practice, and it could have had a chapter in it on habits. But instead, it was a book about habits, and it has a chapter about deliberate practice. And that is an example of choosing a frame where I don't have to create the desire. I think it's much easier for a person, a reader, to understand how their habits would benefit them. Oh, okay, I just like kind of implicitly get that it's nice to have good habits and that would lead to what I want, whether it's more money or more productivity or less stress or reducing weight or whatever it is. Like, I get that there's a connection there. Whereas if I had chosen deliberate practice, some people are familiar with the term and maybe see it, but like there's more legwork for me to do to explain to you how this links to what you already desire. And so I think that's a good example of how to actually do it with a product where how can you choose the right overall frame for the product so that people immediately see how it benefits them. If it requires 30 seconds of explanation, you kind of already lost it. It's like, it's taking too long. Like, it needs to be, I think for books in particular, if you look at the cover, you need to know like immediately within 5 seconds, I get why this would benefit me. And not everybody's going to buy it, but they at least can see, okay, I know why that would be useful. And I think that level of connection with the underlying desires that people have is essential if you want a product to really take off.
For sure. I would love to know, after going through this journey and spending so much time researching, learning, writing, talking about life and how to live a better life and habits, what are some of the habits that you used to really value that you've dropped or no longer value? Or to frame it another way, what is something that you've changed your mind about since getting started in this space?
That's interesting. I think something that I've changed my mind about is that I used to think that greatness in any particular area was a peak performance, or was like, what I've changed my mind about is that greatness can actually be an average performance repeated a great amount of times, or maybe even a slightly above average performance repeated so consistently that you win over time. And so seeing great outcomes as like a point on a spectrum of repetitions, that's been something that I've changed my tune about. I used to think it was much more about like this one defining moment. But now I see it more as like a milestone that happens along the way. And so this idea that you like don't actually have to be world-class exceptional at every skill, but if you can, it's kind of like the thing you want to be world-class in is consistency. And if you can do that, then that can actually, like that alone can take you very far. I think about back when I started my site, there was a guy who, when we started, his audience is like relatively early on. It's like maybe a month or two into me building my site. I think I had like 2,000 readers or something. And he had 20,000 at the time. So he's 10x bigger than me. And within 2 years, I was 10x bigger than he was. And it wasn't because he was worse than I was. I actually think his content was as good, maybe even better in some way. They were different industries. He had a fitness blog. I was writing about habits. But the main thing that changed is he stopped writing. That's the number one thing that changed is he stopped posting. And I just kept posting new articles every Monday and Thursday. I did like 2 a week for the first 3 years. And that alone was enough to lead to this massive difference when we turned around a couple years later. And so I don't know. I just kind of feel like there's a lesson buried in there that I didn't fully appreciate early on. And yeah, so that's been one thing that I've maybe changed a little bit about.
Well, you have a section in your blog titled, it's like greatest athletic achievements. And you had 3 there I really liked. There's one of them's the 2008 Lessick swimming comeback in the Olympics.
Oh God. I basically cry whenever I watch that clip. It's so incredible.
Yeah, it really is. As I was going through those and I was watching those, I was preparing for this, the Secretariat run, and then you listed Cardale Jones 3-game stretch at Ohio State, which another insane athletic outperformance. But within that, I also read that you grew up in Hamilton, Ohio. When I saw Cardale Jones, I was like, oh, he's probably from Ohio. How is growing up in a small town in the Midwest impacted the way that you think about work and about life?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, it's impacted me in so many different ways. So Hamilton is a relatively small town, like 50,000 people or so. It's like maybe 45 minutes north of Cincinnati. So it's not like you don't feel like you're out in the middle of nowhere. But there's a lot of farmland around there. And my grandparents owned a farm. They lived like 5 minutes away from us. I spent most of my childhood running around the field there. My cousin and I, there's a creek that runs through the field. And we made my dad drag an 80-pound bag of concrete down there so that we could build a dam. And so we created like a little lake and a pond with a waterfall and all this stuff. Anyway, so I just like my whole childhood was playing outside like that. And so I loved that. Every Sunday for the first 18 years of my life, all my uncles and aunts and cousins would come over to my grandparents' house and my grandma would make dinner for 18 people. And that I think was like a fairly unique experience. A lot of people that I talk to now like didn't get together with their extended family like that every week. And so I think it probably strengthened family ties. Like family's definitely important to me. I do notice that I still have like an itch to get outside and to explore. And I wonder how much of that was fostered a little bit just by like exploring the field and exploring the farmland and terrain around me when I was a kid. So I travel a lot and love that. So those, all of those things I think influence kind of my approach to life and what I find enjoyable and fun today.
Love it, man. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, and Austin grew up in a small town in PNW, which is in many ways, very, very similar. I think so. But hey, man, I really appreciate your time, James, for coming onto the podcast. We're glad to have you. For those of you that have not checked it out, we recommend very highly that you grab a copy of Atomic Habits, the New York Times bestselling book that James Clear is the author of, and we also recommend very highly that you sign up for his email list, which is also full of a lot of value and great quotes and 3 valuable things to think about each week. So, James Clear, thank you very much for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
All right, here we go.
Hey, guys, it's Austin. And if you've been loving the podcast, you got to go check out brandgrowthexperts.com. That's where I work one-on-one with my clients to help them build faster growing, more profitable online stores. I've got coaching programs and workshops that we host all over the world. Would love to have you come check it out. If you're a fast growing e-commerce business or you want to be a fast growing e-commerce business, you got to check it out. That's the spot for you. We go more in depth than we do in the podcast with comprehensive trainings and coaching to help you scale up. Check it out, brandgrowthexperts.com. See you there.